All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're going to be tackling attitudes and stereotypes.
Ooh, interesting.
These things are like, under the surface, shaping so much of our social world. And honestly, I think understanding them better is going to help everybody, whether it's for, that big meeting you got coming up or just like figuring out like why people act the way they do.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're going to crack the code using this really fascinating social psychology textbook.
A textbook of social psychology. Classic. Always a good starting point.
It really is. And get this. Did you know that attitudes actually have like 3 different parts?
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's feelings, thoughts, and ND actions all wrapped up like in this one powerful package.
Wow. So it's more than just like a gut reaction, right? There's a whole system at play.
Exactly. And the book uses this example of widow remarriage. It's a kind of, interesting way to illustrate this. So think about it. Someone might feel sympathy for a widow, right?
Sure.
Then believe that she deserves happiness. And then like actually go out and advocate for her right to remarry.
Right.
So there you have it, the feeling, the thought, and the action.
All stemming from their attitude towards the whole, towards widowhood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how these 3 things, these 3 components can actually lead to like real world consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just passive, right? They actually drive us to do things. It's very interesting.
It really is. And the text also talks about how attitudes are, learned, pretty stable, tied to specific things. But what really stuck out to me was how motivational they are.
Oh, yeah.
Like if you are just so pumped about fitness, you're way more likely to hit the gym, right?
That makes sense.
Yeah, your attitude is like setting the stage.
Yeah, I can see that.
Right. Okay. Now, it's easy to get attitudes and beliefs kind of mixed up,
Yeah, I can see that.
but they're not quite the same thing.
Okay.
So beliefs are more about what we think is true based on, facts.
Okay.
But attitudes, they bring in those feelings and actions too.
I see.
So it's like believing climate change is real is one thing, but your attitude toward it, that's what shapes whether you just shrug it off or you become like a passionate activist about it,
That's a great point. I like that. Beliefs are like the foundation, but the attitude determines how we react,
Exactly.
how we engage with those beliefs.
Exactly.
And speaking of how attitudes form, this textbook dives into some really fascinating theories. Katz's functional theory really stood out to me.
Oh, yeah, Katz. He argued that we hold on to certain attitudes because, like, they're actually doing something for us. They serve a function.
Right, exactly. And he outlines 4 main functions. There's instrumental, ego defensive, value expressive, and knowledge.
Okay.
So take the instrumental function, for example. We develop positive attitudes towards things that reward us and negative attitudes towards things that punish us.
Right.
So it's all about, maximizing pleasure, minimizing pain.
It's like our inner reward system at play.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Then there's the ego defensive function. This one's a little deeper a little bit. Attitudes can actually protect our self-esteem, even if it means, sort of twisting reality a bit.
Right, right. Book uses the example of someone with low self-esteem developing prejudices to, like, boost their own sense of worth.
Yeah, that's a defense mechanism, but definitely a harmful one.
It is. Then we have the value expressive function, right?
Mm-hmm.
This one's about showcasing our values, who we are at our core. So, like, if you really value sustainability, you're probably going to have a really positive attitude toward, like, eco-friendly products.
Right. Align your actions with what you believe in.
Exactly. It's all
Yeah.
about that alignment. And then lastly, there's the knowledge function.
Yeah.
We crave making sense of the world.
You're right. We do.
And our attitudes give us a framework for understanding and organizing all this information that's coming at us all the time.
Right. It's like creating mental shortcuts.
Exactly. We use our attitudes to categorize information, make quick judgments, even if they're not, always spot on.
So essentially, you hold certain attitudes because they serve you in some way.
Right.
Whether it's getting you rewards, protecting your ego, expressing your values, or simply helping you make sense of the world.
It's kind of mind-blowing. And speaking of making sense of the world, this leads us perfectly to our next topic, stereotypes.
Oh, good one.
These things are everywhere, and they're incredibly powerful.
They really are. The textbook defines stereotypes as a cluster of beliefs, often lacking, a rational basis, about people in a particular group. It's like painting everyone with the same brush.
Yeah, and the key here is that they're generalizations. Like the book says, Japanese people are industrious.
Right.
That's like a kind of a positive stereotype.
Yeah.
But then it also mentions Bengalis being timid. that's a negative one.
Yeah.
So they can cut both ways.
What's important to remember is that while they might seem helpful for, making quick judgments, they often lack accuracy and can lead to unfair biases.
For sure. And speaking of how these stereotypes even develop, the book points to a few things. First up, inadequate information about other groups.
Huh.
It's like forming an opinion based on a tiny sample size.
Right. We fill in the gaps with assumptions, often influenced by, what society's telling us or cultural biases that already exist.
And then there's socialization. Our parents, our friends, the culture at large, they're all shaping our views from a young age.
Think about the stories we hear growing up, or even the jokes we laugh at, even if we don't mean to. It often reinforces those stereotypes.
It's like a cycle it's hard to break.
It really is.
Yeah.
The book also talks about imitation. We naturally copy the beliefs and behaviors of those around us.
Makes sense. It's part of wanting to fit in, belong.
Exactly, exactly. And then you have traditions, cultural norms, which can be so deeply rooted and really resistant to change. They often carry those implicit stereotypes that are hard to even recognize, let alone unlearn.
Yeah, like think about traditional gender roles or expectations about certain professions. These things can be so embedded in our culture that we don't even think to question them.
It's interesting.
It really is. And then lastly, social and cultural distance plays a role. The less we interact with people from different backgrounds, the more likely we are to like rely on stereotypes to fill in the blanks.
It's the unknown that breeds those assumptions, those anxieties. Bridging that distance through meaningful interaction is key to breaking them down.
I couldn't agree more. But here's the thing. Stereotypes, even though they can be harmful, also like serve some functions in our social lives. It's like this double-edged sword.
How can something that's potentially so damaging also be useful? That's fascinating.
Well, for one, they help us to make sense of social behavior,
Yeah.
even if in like a really simplified way.
Right.
It's like having this mental map, even if it's inaccurate, to kind of navigate those situations.
But the textbook gives that example of the stereotype that Americans are friendly, and this might lead someone to approach those interactions with Americans in a more open and casual way. So it sets an expectation, whether right or wrong.
Exactly. And stereotypes also let us make predictions, even if they're often off base. Like if you believe that all lawyers are argumentative, you might brace yourself for a debate.
Right. Of course, the danger is that we let these predictions dictate our behavior instead of engaging with each person as an individual.
So true. Now, all this talk about stereotypes brings us to a really important distinction. Stereotypes versus prejudice.
Yes.
They get used like interchangeably all the time, but there's this subtle but really crucial difference.
I'm ready for this breakdown because it's one of those nuances that can really trip people up.
Oh, for sure. So prejudice is an attitude.
Yeah.
Remember, like those three parts we talked about.
Right.
Feelings, thoughts, and actions.
Hmm.
And it's often negative, directed towards a specific group, and has a strong emotional charge.
So think of it like this. Prejudice is the feeling, the judgment. Stereotypes are the beliefs that fuel that prejudice.
Exactly. You might believe teenagers are irresponsible. That's the stereotype. But if that belief leads you to feel disdain for teenagers or discriminate against them, that's prejudice in action.
So prejudice takes the stereotype and adds that emotional layer, often leading to harmful actions.
It's powerful. And that's why, like, understanding the difference is so important, right? Because while both stereotypes and prejudice can be problematic, prejudice often has that stronger emotional component that makes it even more resistant to change.
And that, my friend, is a conversation for part 2 of our deep dive. It's already been a fascinating exploration, wouldn't you say?
I know, right? We've covered so much ground, from unpacking the ABCs of attitudes to, like, tackling the complexities of stereotypes and prejudice. And in part 2, we're going to explore even more about how these concepts shape our social world and how we can challenge our own biases. So stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into attitudes and stereotypes.
I know, right? We went from those, like, basic building blocks of attitudes all the way to, the interplay of stereotypes and prejudice.
And speaking of prejudice, that's a topic with some, serious real-world consequences.
Oh, absolutely. Prejudice can actually lead to discrimination.
Right, which is when those negative attitudes actually turn into, like, unfair treatment.
It's that behavioral component of prejudice in action.
Exactly.
The textbook highlights, like, some pretty alarming examples, like how it affects hiring decisions,
Housing.
healthcare even.
Yeah, it creates these like systemic inequalities, right?
Mhm.
Disadvantaging certain groups while giving others a leg up.
And it's not always obvious or intentional, which I think makes it even more insidious.
Right. It can be, subtle biases, microaggressions, even
Uh-huh.
like jokes that seem harmless but actually reinforce harmful stereotypes.
It's like this hidden code influencing our behavior without us even realizing it.
Exactly. That's why awareness is so important.
Recognizing our own biases, understanding the historical and social context.
It's key to dismantling those harmful patterns.
It's about actively challenging our assumptions and seeking out diverse perspectives.
For sure.
Speaking of perspectives, the textbook actually explores different theories about how prejudice develops and persists.
It's not just about individual bigotry,
Right.
but also about these, broader social and cultural factors.
Absolutely. One theory that really got me thinking was social categorization.
It's like our brains are hardwired to simplify the world by putting people into those categories.
We're always looking for those patterns, trying to make sense of all this information.
Information overload.
Right. And while that can be helpful, it can also lead to those overgeneralizations and stereotypes.
We start to see that us versus them mentality, right? The in-groups and out-groups, and that can create division and distrust.
And that feeling of division, it gets even worse when you add competition for resources or power.
Right, the textbook calls this realistic conflict theory. The idea that prejudice pops up when groups are fighting over those limited resources, whether it's jobs, housing, or social status.
It becomes this zero-sum game.
Right.
One group's win feels like another group's loss.
Exactly, and that can really fuel hostility and prejudice, especially when those in power want to stay on top.
It's a good reminder that prejudice isn't just individual psychology. It's about those dynamics of power and inequality.
For sure. And another theory that kind of sheds some light on this is social identity theory, which emphasizes how our sense of self is actually tied to the groups that we're a part of.
We get a part of our identity from those groups, whether it's our nationality, our ethnicity, our religion, even our favorite sports team.
It's fascinating, right? We tend to favor our in-groups and see them more positively.
Even if those groups are based on totally random things.
Exactly. It's like we're hardwired to look for that sense of belonging and validation through those social connections.
It makes you feel good, which of course can lead to in-group bias.
Giving preferential treatment to your own group members, even at the expense of others.
Which can then, of course, perpetuate prejudice and discrimination.
Absolutely. It's a reminder to be mindful of those in-group biases and actively, work to promote fairness and inclusivity.
And speaking of promoting fairness, the textbook dives into some strategies for actually reducing prejudice.
It's not easy, but there are definitely things we can do.
There are.
One approach that's been shown to be effective is intergroup contact.
Oh, yeah.
The more we interact with people from different groups, the more we can kind of break down those stereotypes and reduce prejudice.
It's about, humanizing the other, recognizing our shared humanity.
Right. But it's not just about casual contact.
No.
The textbook really emphasizes, that meaningful interaction, the kind that involves cooperation and those, shared goals.
Working together towards a common purpose.
That can really foster empathy and understanding.
I like.
And it's also critical, to address the underlying social and economic inequalities that contribute to prejudice in the first place.
Yeah, because as long as those disparities exist, prejudice has, fertile ground to grow.
It's about creating a more just and equitable society where everyone has a real chance to thrive.
I love that. And that brings us to, the role of education.
Education can be so powerful.
Right. The textbook really highlights how education can play this powerful role in challenging those stereotypes and promoting tolerance.
It's about, giving people that knowledge, the critical thinking skills to question those assumptions and resist prejudice.
And it's not just formal education either.
Right.
It's also about being exposed to diverse perspectives through the media, literature, art.
It's about broadening our horizons and challenging our own biases. It's a lifelong journey of learning and growth.
It really is. And it's a journey worth taking.
For sure.
A world without prejudice is a world where everyone can reach their full potential.
Couldn't have said it better myself. But hey, we're not done yet.
Oh, there's more.
In part 3 of our deep dive, we're going to explore some even more practical strategies for challenging our own biases and promoting a more inclusive world. So stay with us.
Welcome back to the deep dive. It's Kind of incredible how much we've uncovered in our exploration of attitudes and stereotypes. We went from like how they form to recognizing the harmful impact of prejudice.
It really has been quite the journey. And, as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to focus on, what we can do, both individually and collectively, to challenge those biases and create a world that's more inclusive.
I totally agree. We've talked about education and intergroup contact, but the textbook also highlights some more practical strategies that, we can all put into practice.
Yeah, and one that comes to mind is mindfulness.
Mindfulness?
It's all about, paying attention to your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, right, in the present moment without judgment.
So like if you catch yourself making a snap judgment about someone
Yeah.
based on their group affiliation, you just got to hit pause
Right.
and ask yourself, okay, where's this assumption coming from?
Yeah.
Like, is it based on facts or am I just like falling back on those stereotypes?
You want to train yourself to really spot those biased thoughts as they pop up.
Yeah, catch them.
Yeah.
And once you've identified them, you can start to challenge them.
Exactly.
The textbook actually mentioned something called cognitive restructuring, which is basically like swapping out those negative thoughts with ones that are more balanced and accurate.
Yeah, it's like reframing your perceptions and challenging those, those ingrained narratives that kind of fuel stereotypes in the first place.
So like, let's say you catch yourself thinking, ugh, all teenagers are just so lazy.
Right.
Try to counter that with like, examples of hardworking teenagers that, who have big goals.
Actively look for evidence that contradicts those stereotypes.
Yeah. And speaking of seeking things out, another really powerful strategy is diversifying your social circles. Surrounding yourself with people from different backgrounds, experiences, it can really broaden your perspective and challenge your assumptions in the best way possible.
It's about pushing past your comfort zone, embracing the richness of human diversity.
Absolutely. And don't, shy away from those tough conversations either.
Right.
Like if you hear someone making a prejudiced remark, don't just let it slide.
Call it out.
Call it out. Challenge that bias.
It might feel a little awkward at first.
It might.
But, those conversations can really plant seeds of change and help create a more inclusive environment.
They can. And remember, it's not about being perfect, right?
Yeah.
We all have biases.
We do.
It's about being aware of them and actively trying to unlearn them.
It's a lifelong journey of self-reflection and growth.
It really is. And it's so crucial, for creating a world where everyone feels valued, respected.
Imagine a world where we approach each other with that curiosity and openness, free from the constraints of prejudice.
Oh, that's a world worth striving for, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And it all starts with each of us taking responsibility for our thoughts and actions.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, I encourage everyone listening to really reflect on what we've discussed.
Yeah.
And think about, how you can apply these insights to your own life.
What biases can you challenge? What steps can you take to create a more inclusive environment in your own sphere of influence?
Yeah, those are questions worth pondering because even those small actions can make a ripple effect and contribute to a world that's more just and more equitable.
Remember, knowledge is power. And by understanding these complexities of attitudes and stereotypes, we can start to dismantle those, harmful structures that perpetuate prejudice.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some new insights and a renewed commitment to, building that world where everyone can thrive.
The journey continues.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Your support helps us keep creating valuable content like this. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Join our community for more insights into psychology and personal development. Let's grow and learn together. See you in the next video.